There is no greater emotional challenge for a man than to encounter a woman who does not need to be desired in order to feel worthy. Because when a woman has healed her longing for validation, her mere presence exposes all the emotional deficits a man has been masking for years with power, control, or silence. I've seen many men who believed they had everything under control, career, time, emotions, until they met a woman who asked for nothing but also accepted no crumbs. A woman who didn't scream but also didn't remain silent, who didn't manipulate but also didn't give herself away. And then something broke inside them. Not out of weakness, but because they felt emotionally seen for the first time and didn't know how to withstand that gaze. There is no relationship tactic that can replace the quiet strength of a woman who has chosen a life of inner alignment, because alignment doesn't seduce, it confronts. And in a world where so many relationships are based on illusions and fear, feminine alignment is not a romantic gesture, it disarms. Maybe you're no longer watching this video to learn how to be more likable, but to understand why some connections have left a deeper mark on you than you can logically explain. And that only becomes clear when you stop thinking in terms of superficial attraction patterns and start recognizing yourself. Who are you when you stop wanting to be chosen and begin to choose yourself? I'm not going to explain how you should change to appear more interesting. I won't give you formulas to fit into the molds of seduction. What I want to show you is something else. 5 ways to emotionally inhabit yourself as a woman. 5 ways of being in this world, so honest and deep that they awaken something in some men they don't even understand. Vulnerability. And I'm not speaking of weakness, but of that inner touch that is so authentic that even the strongest defense mechanisms begin to crack. These profiles are not ideals or rules. They are expressions of women who have lived, loved, suffered, and rebuilt their emotional dignity without turning it into armor. If you've ever felt too intense, too complex, or too free, it may be time to realize that these very qualities are what make you unforgettable to people whose inner worlds are still alive. Maybe that's why you were often misunderstood, because you were emotionally powerful in an environment that only celebrated the superficial. This is not a space for easy answers, but a place for women who are no longer afraid of difficult questions and are ready to meet themselves with the same honesty with which they wish to be seen. There is a kind of woman whose strength lies not in what she displays, but in what she has no need to prove. A woman who is not afraid of silence, of open questions, and who knows that true intimacy is not rushed, but cultivated. And that is what deeply unsettles many men. It's not about coldness or indifference, it's something else. Emotional security. The calm of a woman who can tolerate being temporarily invisible when it comes to protecting her inner universe from unworthy eyes. I've seen rational men feel deeply drawn and simultaneously disoriented by women who didn't explain themselves, didn't correct their image, didn't apologize for their mystery. Because real mystery is not staged, it arises from a lived inner life that doesn't need a spotlight to feel valid. This woman doesn't hold back out of calculation, but out of awareness. She knows showing everything is not the same as being honest, and emotional display is often just a disguised cry for attention, rooted in lack. She doesn't withdraw, but she also doesn't surrender to every kind impulse. She observes, feels, assesses, and when she chooses, she does so with integrity. What sets her apart is not her silence, but the intention she fills it with. She does not remain silent out of distance, but out of respect for her own process. Because she knows opening one's heart is a serious act, one that deserves care, not haste. And this quiet depth, in a culture that glorifies speed, is almost revolutionary. In a time where everything is expected to happen instantly, her emotional slowness is a silent act of resistance. While others rush to be understood, she moves slowly, knowing that those who lack the patience to get to know her probably also lack the maturity to keep her. This woman does not compete. She doesn't need to be the funniest, the flashiest, or the most available. Because she has understood, true worth doesn't scream, it is lived. And her authenticity doesn't seek applause, it seeks connection. When a man meets such a woman, a restlessness awakens in him that he often cannot name. The feeling of facing someone who does not need him to feel worthy. And that forces him, if he has the courage, to look at himself unfiltered. Some do, others run. The most fascinating thing about this woman is not her silence, but what her silence reveals, that there is no more powerful form of attraction than the alignment between what one feels, thinks, and does. And that emotional restraint is not a wall, but a sign of how sacred she considers her inner life to be. Often this woman has been misunderstood as cold, distant, unreachable. But those who look beyond the surface recognize one of the deepest forms of love, a love that does not perform, that is not offered to just anyone, but blooms only where respect, reciprocity, and depth are present. And you, how many times have you stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of wisdom? How many times have you walked away, not from disinterest, but from self-respect? Maybe you already are this woman without realizing it. And if you are, you don't need to change. You just need to remember, your restraint is not a lack. It is an expression of dignity. There are women whose presence does not impress through volume or superficial charm, but through something much deeper. An ability to listen with their whole body, to remain in silence without needing to fill it, and to stay present without taking on the other's shadows. This presence, unfamiliar to many men, comes not from instinct but from emotional maturity grown in the uncomfortable moments of real relationships, in patience with invisible wounds and in the conscious decision not to interfere when not invited. This woman does not devalue, does not interrupt, she doesn't speak to be right, and she doesn't project her own wounds as advice. She knows. True empathy is not about speaking beautifully or hugging mechanically, but about entering another's experience without taking it over, without making it her mission. What moves her is not the desire to be loved, but the genuine desire to share a space of emotional truth, without conditions, without manipulation. And that, in a world where many want to shine through words, knowledge, or apparent understanding, feels like an unexpected refuge. There are men who, even if they never say it, are emotionally exhausted by relationships where they are only heard in order to be corrected, where every moment of vulnerability becomes an opportunity to be judged or changed. And when these men encounter a woman who simply stays, who doesn't correct the emotion but holds it, who doesn't rush the process but walks alongside it, they feel something they didn't know they needed, to be understood without being overwhelmed. This is not about submission or compliance. This woman does not tolerate disrespect. She justifies nothing in the name of love. Her compassion is not naive, her listening not limitless. She is clear in her boundaries and selective with her energy, because she has often learned the hard way that you cannot heal someone who doesn't want to heal, and you should not endlessly accompany someone who only wants to be admired. If she stays, if she opens, it is with an integrity that disarms without intending to, that connects without demanding, that transforms without manipulating. And for a man who has tied his worth to performance, control, or self-sufficiency, it is deeply confronting to meet someone who sees him without requiring him to prove himself, who hears him without needing to shine, who accepts his process without glossing over his edges. She doesn't affirm egos, wow. She recognizes souls. And that's why she doesn't create addiction, she creates awareness. She doesn't intoxicate with flattery. She invites accountability for one's emotional life. And this invitation, gentle yet powerful, is what separates a relationship that distracts from one that awakens. Because when a woman loves from maturity, she no longer settles for convenient connections. She only wants relationships with the courage to be real. There are women whose life energy doesn't depend on a relationship and doesn't revolve around external validation. Their passion for life isn't a role nor a performance to please, but the expression of a deep inner connection with who they are, what they feel, and what they wish to create. And this vibrant authenticity, which does not ask permission to exist, has an unexpected effect on men who are used to relationships where desire is mistaken for need and passion is lived as drama instead of conscious presence. This woman doesn't expect to be completed because she doesn't come from lack. She isn't looking for admiration. Even though she often inspires it without trying, she doesn't seduce through effort but through a presence that makes it clear. Her emotional world has its own direction. Her days have meaning, with or without company. And her love is not a claim, but a free, clear, mature decision. Free of emotional blackmail. I've worked with men who were deeply moved after encountering such a woman, but not because she matched their expectations, but because she didn't, because she kept attending her classes, didn't delay her projects, didn't subordinate her identity to the relationship, and yet offered a kind of love that was both free and deeply connected. For a man used to shaping relationships through control or overcare, this is an almost existential challenge. How do you maintain a real connection with someone who doesn't need to be held? This woman's passion is not dramatic or loud. It is consistent, steady, and grounded. She loves what she does, protects her freedom, nurtures her interests, and does not sacrifice her personal growth to soothe others' insecurities. And when she falls in love, she does not disappear into the other. She shares herself out of joy, not need. For her, love is not self-abandonment, but mutual growth. That's why she rejects any dynamic that tries to shrink her just to maintain a relationship. If she feels she must dim her light to avoid conflict, she leaves, not out of coldness, but because she understands. True harmony does not come from self-denial, but from respect. And no love that demands you give up yourself can ever be truly mutual. For her, autonomy is not cold individualism or forced independence, but an emotionally mature way of life. One that doesn't reject intimacy, but also doesn't beg for it. And this maturity is not a threat to emotionally available men. It is a beacon, a clear sign that a relationship can be based on freedom, not dependency. Many men feel both fascinated and unsettled by this woman. Fascinated because for the first time, someone invites them to grow without requirements. Unsettled because they sense, with her, they can no longer hide behind success, routines, or excuses, because she seeks no heroes and no repair projects. She seeks an awake, emotionally aware partner. And for someone who has never been that, it can be deeply uncomfortable, but also deeply transformative. There is a kind of power that doesn't impose, doesn't shout, doesn't dominate, and doesn't need applause. It is the quiet authority of someone who no longer needs control to feel safe. Of someone who knows true emotional strength doesn't need to be loud, it is felt. For many men, this presence is something entirely new. A woman who asks for nothing, but also does not conform. Who doesn't threaten, but also doesn't retreat. Who doesn't sacrifice herself, but doesn't run away either. She knows the path of self-betrayal. She has been in relationships where her voice was ignored. And she came out not bitter, but with a clarity that only comes when the soul decides to never betray itself again. Her gentleness doesn't come from fear of conflict, but from deep awareness of her own worth. She doesn't need to be right. She doesn't need to dominate. She simply stands. With a calm that unsettles anyone who confuses softness with weakness and silence with submission. This woman doesn't force herself on anyone, but she doesn't disappear either. She doesn't fight to be heard, because her mere presence evokes silence. And that silence is neither empty nor weak. It is filled with years of self-reflection, with necessary letting go, with boundaries that are no longer negotiable. She doesn't need to say much, because every word she speaks carries weight. Her words are powerful, not through volume, but through integrity. I've seen emotionally strong men feel deeply vulnerable in the presence of such women, not because they challenged them with arguments, but because they didn't play reactive games. They could look with compassion and still remain grounded, without raising their voice, without needing to explain themselves. This calm determination disarms because it doesn't enter the game of winning and losing. She doesn't need to win. She just needs to remain true to herself. And this uncompromising devotion to her own truth makes every manipulation seem childish and powerless. Such women have often been labeled as cold, distant, or inaccessible, but in truth, they are simply not manipulable. And for those who are used to seducing through emotional instability, that is an insurmountable wall. Her strength lies exactly in that balance. She does not reject vulnerability, but she also does not allow it to serve as an excuse for emotional abuse. She doesn't belittle the pain of others, but she also doesn't take it on as her own responsibility. When a woman combines compassion with clarity, something fundamental shifts in the interaction. There is no more room for victim roles or control mechanisms disguised as love. What remains is only what is real, the possibility of an encounter between two adults who do not need each other but choose each other. And for someone who has never loved without dependency, that can be deeply unsettling or deeply liberating. She inspires respect without demanding it, because her self-respect is so evident, so strong, so non-negotiable, that to cross it would be an act of absurdity. And the man who can perceive her beyond his childish projections will not only respect her, he will grow beside her, not because she pushes him, saves him, or convinces him, but because her silent presence alone invites him to grow up. There are connections that dazzle with their intensity, others that soothe through routine, and then there are those rare and deeply healthy relationships where no one has to be saved or perfected, because for the first time, one is met with a gaze that promises neither ideal nor rescue, but looks with honesty, chooses with maturity, and accompanies without losing itself. In this emotional space, a woman is present whose way of loving is not about sugarcoating pain or beautifying herself, nor about merging with the other in order to feel connection. Because she has, sometimes through pain, sometimes through clarity, learned that truly nourishing relationships do not numb, but gently confront that which one has not yet dared to see. She does not come to fill inner emptiness or heal wounds that are not hers. And not because she is incapable of love, but because her love no longer comes from a desire to be completed, but from a genuine wish to share a path without taking over the others. She does not expect perfection because she understands that emotional growth is neither linear, nor heroic, nor immediate. Her closeness is not measured by compliments or corrections, but by her ability to stay without overprotecting, to listen without dissolving, to observe without judging. In a world full of relationships where people give in order to be recognized or idealized to avoid feeling alone, this woman is a radical counterpoint. She sees a man's potential without denying his shadows, acknowledges what he has yet to develop without making it her mission, and stays in relationships where mutual growth is not a moral duty, but a natural result of respect, real presence, and unconditional affection. I have witnessed processes in which emotionally well-structured men, upon meeting such a woman, realized they could no longer pretend to be self-sufficient because she wasn't impressed by appearances, charisma, or the mask of control. She saw beyond, not with arrogance, but with a directness that stirred without force, awakened without pressure, and touched parts of them they didn't know existed. What defines her is not her capacity to carry everything, but her sense for knowing when to stay and when to leave. Not her unconditional devotion, but her clear understanding that love must never mean self-betrayal. Not her gentleness, but the firmness with which she reminds herself each day. A relationship that demands she tear herself apart is not one she should stay in. She elevates, not because she compensates. She does not trivialize. She does not turn the other into a mirror of her own shortcomings or desires. She does not need perfection. She needs self-responsibility. And whoever can relate to her without trying to dominate, without fearing her clarity or her freedom, realizes that he is standing in front of a woman who demands no admiration, but naturally evokes it. Because in her way of feeling, being, and choosing lies a truth that doesn't need to be explained. It can only be experienced or mourned, if lost. After years of supporting women who have loved in various ways, some dissolving themselves, others silencing their truth out of fear of losing the other or believing they had to change to be loved, I've come to understand true transformation does not occur when we finally understand the other, but when we radically and honestly recognize ourselves. Because only when we stop begging for connection out of lack and begin to view ourselves with emotional dignity, does a new way of being in the world emerge. You no longer seduce in order to be seen. You no longer adapt in order to be accepted. You no longer endure the unbearable, hoping that love will eventually arrive as a reward. You finally begin to choose from awareness, not from emotional hunger. Maybe you recognized yourself in one of these women, or in all of them. Maybe you saw your own phases, past relationships, or parts of yourself that are just now being born. It's not about becoming a perfect archetype or feeling obligated to meet new expectations to be liked by men. True transformation does not arise from pressure or harsh self-judgment. It begins in that intimate, almost sacred moment when you decide to no longer betray yourself just to fit into relationships that silence your voice, your body, or your gaze, because there is no more powerful way to love than from inner freedom. And emotional freedom is not an ideal, it is a daily practice. Every time you say no without guilt. Every time you remain silent because your soul has no desire to explain. Every time you recognize yourself as enough, even when the world claims otherwise. In each of those moments, you exercise a kind of freedom that doesn't shine through words, but fundamentally changes your relationships. And then something unexpected happens. Your way of loving changes. You stop chasing and start inviting. You stop justifying the unjustifiable and begin to protect your inner peace, not as armor, but as an act of care. And then the man who comes into your life changes as well. Not because you've learned to better manipulate him, but because you no longer let yourself be treated as if you didn't know your worth. None of these women are perfect. None are free of contradictions, fears, or doubts. But they all share one unshakable inner decision: to remain true to themselves, even if it means letting go of relationships that cannot hold them. And that, even if it's not always recognized, even if it unsettles, even if it sometimes leaves emptiness where closeness used to be, is the beginning of a kind of love you've never experienced before. It's not about being more likable, stronger, or more in control. It's about coming home, occupying yourself without apologizing, allowing yourself to simply be, and trusting that when love arrives, it will speak the same language you've already learned, the language of authenticity.